Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're taking on an extraordinary journey into the concept of scale, guided by E.O. Wilson's chapter, The Time Machine, from his book Biophilia.
And it's such a powerful idea.
It really is. The premise is, what if we had a machine that could completely change how we perceive time and space? Speed it up, slow it down.
Magnify, compress the whole thing. Wilson uses this to ask a huge question. What would we actually learn about life itself if we could do that?
Exactly. And that's our mission for this deep dive, to understand why he felt we needed this radical shift in perspective.
Right. He argues it's the only way to see the fundamental hierarchy of biology. You have to see it all, from a microsecond of a chemical reaction up to millions of years of evolution.
And that framework is what links everything, from human behavior right back to our deepest biological roots.
It's the ultimate context for understanding our place in nature.
Okay, so let's get into the tool itself. This time machine. It's his device for thought experiments, right?
It's the perfect metaphor. It lets him stretch a single second into an hour, or, squeeze centuries down into minutes. It gives us a viewpoint our senses just can't.
And he doesn't start in some abstract place. He anchors this whole experiment on a very specific, very quiet evening.
May 12th, 1859, Cambridge, Massachusetts. The historian A. Hunter Dupree said the people involved were standing on the knife edge between two epochs.
And those people are two absolute intellectual heavyweights, Louis Agassiz and Benjamin Pierce.
Agassiz he was the scientific celebrity of the United States, a world expert on glaciers, fishes, a Harvard professor.
Founder of the Museum of Comparative Zoology. He was a giant.
Yeah.
And critically, he was about to become Darwin's most famous and most effective American opponent.
And his ally, walking with him, is Benjamin Pierce, a brilliant mathematician. They're on their way home from a dinner party.
Not just any dinner party, though. It was hosted by Asa Gray, who was Darwin's biggest supporter in America.
And at that dinner, Gray had just laid out the core of Darwin's theory for the very first time in the Western Hemisphere.
The atmosphere must have been incredibly tense. Wilson says Agassiz was deeply disturbed. He had already told Gray, "We must stop this."
And that's the moment the time machine focuses on, this quiet walk, this conversation. This is what Wilson calls organismic time.
It's the scale we live on, where our actions, our words, our thoughts, they unfold over seconds and minutes.
The only scale we can naturally perceive. But Dupree's point was that the stakes of that quiet conversation were higher than any war between European monarchs. The world was about to change.
So now we engage the machine, we slow the reel down 1,000 times, and we zoom way, way in.
The two men basically freeze. We're going to examine a single 4-second thought, and it starts with Pierce saying a phrase.
He says, "Agassiz, I am much concerned."
And in the very first millisecond, the sound has already hit Agassiz's eardrum. The energy is transferred through the bones in his middle ear and reached the cochlea,
where it's instantly converted from mechanical energy into electrical signals.
And those signals are just racing through his nervous system up into the forebrain, the very seat of consciousness.
Right.
So he's heard the words, but the real work is just beginning.
You mean the actual processing?
Exactly. In the next few tenths of a second, billions of neurons fire in these coordinated patterns. They're making connections, pulling up long-term memories, activating emotional centers.
All to give the words context and meaning. And the speech centers are already preparing a reply. It's all happening so fast.
In less than a second. And then 4 seconds after he heard the concern, Agassiz gives his reply. "Pierce, we must await developments."
But Wilson takes us deeper. We magnify again, slow the reel down even more, and we enter a new realm.
We enter biochemical time.
Now we're seeing individual molecules. The cells are swarming with activity like a hyperactive crowd. Enzymes are locking onto proteins.
And we can actually see a nerve cell discharge. That electrical signal is created by this massive sudden flow of sodium ions across the cell membrane.
An event that takes just a few thousandths of a second. If we weren't in the time machine, that signal would be flying down the nerve at 30 feet per second.
And that's the key takeaway. Agassiz's consciousness, his worry, his carefully chosen words, it's all built on these physical, chemical, electrical events happening in milliseconds.
It's a direct challenge to his whole worldview, isn't it? The idea of a mind separate from the material body.
It's a huge challenge. The projector makes the physical mechanism of consciousness visible.
So that visualization is powerful, but it's only half the journey. We spin the dial the other way.
Way, way faster. We go back to organismic time, the men resume their walk, and then we just keep accelerating.
Agassiz and Pierce jerkily speed out of the frame. We're rising up above Cambridge, seeing the entire northeastern seaboard.
And now we've entered ecological time. Day and night blur into a kind of dim, continuous light. Individual people or animals, they just disappear.
And something else comes into focus.
Whole populations, entire ecosystems. We can see the cycles of sugar maples and red-eyed vireos expanding and contracting across the landscape over decades.
We can watch succession play out. A pond fills with weeds and becomes a bog. A sand dune grows grass, then shrubs, then pines, and finally a hardwood forest.
The individual organism is gone, and now they're just these large ensembles governed by the mathematical laws of birth, death, and competition. The biochemical details are completely lost.
And then we push the machine even faster. We go beyond decades, beyond centuries, past 1,000 years.
And now we are in evolutionary time. Agassiz and Pierce as individuals, they're gone, dissolved into the gene pool.
Wilson has this incredible phrasing. He says they are preserved in perpetuity as DNA.
It's a paradox, right? They're erased as individuals, but their genetic legacy, their DNA, diffuses out into the population.
He points out the math of it. You have twice as many grandchildren as children and so on. The genes just spread.
After 1,000 years, individuals and even families lose their relevance as distinct biological units. And over millions of years, populations can split and become entirely new species.
So this journey with a time machine, from microseconds to millions of years, from a molecule to the entire biosphere, this gives us the complete picture.
It does, and this complete vision is what allows Wilson to lay out his central argument about the hierarchy of life.
Right. Let's get into that structure.
Yeah.
He says modern biology is organized in this strict hierarchy.
It is. Molecules build cells, cells build tissues, tissues build organisms, organisms make up populations, and populations form ecosystems.
And the rule is, you can't understand one level without first understanding the level right below it.
That's the bedrock of modern biological research. Molecular biology is the foundation. It's the basement of the whole pyramid. Everything rests on those tiny processes we saw in Agassiz's 4-second thought.
But then he adds a really important caveat. He calls molecular biology a helpless giant.
He does.
What does he mean by that? If it's the foundation, how can it be helpless?
Well, because the laws of the foundation can't predict or define the complexity of the levels above it. A gene, a molecule of DNA, can't tell you how an embryo will develop without knowing the specific environment it's in.
I see. So the foundation is essential, but it isn't everything.
Exactly. Behavior isn't just about nerve cells firing. It's shaped by learning, by culture, by external events that literally reorganize those cells. The complexity and the history of an organism only emerge at those higher levels.
Which brings us full circle right back to that conflict between Agassiz and Darwin. This wasn't just a scientific spat.
Oh, not at all. It was a fundamental clash of worldviews. Agassiz was the restrictionist.
He believed species were creations in the mind of God. It fit perfectly with the transcendentalist philosophy that was dominant at the time.
He even complained that rejecting the idea of repeated acts of divine creation would stop scientific progress. For him, creation was literally God thinking things into existence over and over.
And he saw the complexity of nature, like an eagle's eye or the human hand, as proof. Only a great cause, a designing intelligence, could make something so intricate.
Whereas Darwin was the great expansionist, and he just shattered that worldview. He argued that life is an autonomous process.
One simple enough to be understood through natural selection, acting on random variation.
And that was the shock. Darwin showed that you don't need a great cause to get great complexity. The most intricate organism can be self-assembled through a vast number of tiny, natural steps accumulated over evolutionary time.
So wait, the complexity of the eagle's eye, which seems so perfectly designed? Darwin's expansionist view explains that without a designer.
Yes, the logic is in the cumulative power of selection over immense time. Even a slightly better eye, an eye that's 1% more efficient, gives an organism a reproductive edge. Multiply that tiny advantage by millions of generations.
And you get an eagle's eye.
You get an eagle's eye. It's an entirely naturalistic process, and that discovery freed biology from having to answer to theology.
And this expansionism went right for the last citadel, the human mind. If the brain evolved through natural selection,
then the mind must also have a material explanation.
That's a huge leap.
It is. Darwin wrote back in 1838 that trying to study metaphysics without understanding the brain is like puzzling at astronomy without mechanics.
You can't understand the mind by just thinking about it. You have to study the organ itself.
Right. He famously said, "He who understands baboon would do more toward metaphysics than Locke."
So that's the triumph of modern biology. It's built on these two pillars: evolution by natural selection, and the idea that organisms obey the laws of physics and chemistry. No vital force.
But that very success, that expansion into explaining the mind, is what the humanities often resists. They call it scientism.
This is the dilemma of the machine and the garden, the two cultures divide that C.P. Snow talked about.
And it has deep roots in the Romantic movement, which just rejected the idea that everything in nature, including us, could be open to rational investigation.
You see it in the poetry. Tennyson saying, science grows and beauty dwindles, or Keats warning that philosophy will clip an angel's wings, unweave a rainbow.
They saw science as a destructive force, something that reduced the world, that took the magic out of it.
And those criticisms are still around, aren't they? That science reduces and oversimplifies, that it forgets the spirit.
Absolutely. The feeling that reducing our consciousness to firing neurons and sodium ions somehow diminishes our humanity. It's a powerful critique.
So we end where we started, but with a much clearer picture. Wilson's time machine helps us integrate these four scales of time: biochemical, organismic, ecological, and evolutionary.
To get that complete biological vision.
And that vision, which is rooted in Darwin's expansionism, is a fundamental challenge to the more traditional romantic view of nature as having a spiritual meaning separate from its physical reality.
And the conflict is still very much with us. Wilson argues that our relationship with the living world will remain problematic as long as that divide exists. As long as the scientific view, looking down at the molecule and out across geologic time, is at odds with the spiritual view.
Which leaves us with a final thought. Perhaps the conflict isn't just between science and the humanities, but between the deep, slow perspective of biological time and the frantic pace of modern human life. So we ask you to consider, how can we possibly reconcile Wilson's vision of evolutionary time with the urgent, rapid changes happening to our global ecosystems right now?
That's a powerful thought to end on.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Darwin, DNA, and the two cultures of biology. We'll see you next time.